we are our choices. The case before you today was one about choices. Specifically, the series of choices made by the defendant, Talia-Zilius, that ultimately led to the collapse of an enormous crane on August 31st, 2012. Time and time again, Ms. Zilius was presented with a choice. She could either proceed with construction, remain on track to receive her bonus, but endanger people's lives, or she could slow down, take the adequate precautions, and keep the people she was responsible for safe. As the evidence today has shown, every time Ms. Zilius chose to put people in harm's way, and as a result of this series of increasingly dangerous choices, 2 people are dead. Grace Hopper and Artie Dent didn't have to die. But the defendant made a choice to prioritize speed over safety and profit over people's lives. We, the prosecution, have proved to you today beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant acted with malice or with willful disregard for human life. Let's talk about some of the choices that Talia-Zilius made. The defendant made a choice to disregard the health and safety of her workers. You heard from Emerson Turnkin, who told you that the defendant cut safety sweeps and forced her employees to work longer and longer hours, even though accidents increased as a result. Ms. Turnkin also told you about the multiple times she tried to warn the defendant about the risks she felt Zilius was taking, and how every time Ms. Zilius ignored the warning, ignored the risk, ignored the danger, all in pursuit of her bonus. The defendant made a choice to order Ms. Estraden to lift panels that far exceeded the crane's engineering tolerance. You heard from Quinn Baxter that these panels were concave, which made the risk of lifting them even greater. It's also been proven that Talia-Zilius knew about these risks and chose to proceed in spite of them. The defendant made a choice to order construction to continue in the midst of a hurricane. The defendant chose to proceed even though the winds were gusting at incredibly high speeds, even though the rains were torrential, even though multiple red flags had been waved on August 31st, signaling that if construction continued, people could die. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all these choices indicate the defendant's extreme recklessness. It was reckless for the defendant to authorize the lifting of panels that were heavier than the crane could handle. It was reckless for the defendant to operate in the midst of a hurricane. It was reckless for the defendant to add shift after shift without regard for the disastrous impact on workers. Now, the defense stood before you today and tried to blame Mr. Arthur Dent, a victim in today's case, for his own death. However, as Quinn Baxter, a trusted safety expert, explained, this theory is preposterous. Mr. Dent, a civilian, could not have dismantled the most powerful crane on the East Coast. Additionally, Reese Dentner told you that on August 31st, Mr. Dent wasn't in possession of any tools that could have dismantled the crane because, as Mr. Dentner told you, Artie didn't have any tools at all. Additionally, the defense told you during opening and closing statements that Talia-Zilius is not guilty because she relied on her experts. But as the evidence today has shown, this is simply not the case. Ms. Emerson Turnkin told you that she was repeatedly ignored by the defendant. And you also heard from Talia-Zilius that when Grace Hopper waved the green flag, telling the lift to proceed, Ms. Zilius responded by shoving a green flag at her, instead of stopping the lift. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense tried to paint a pretty picture of Ms. Zilius, someone who cared about other people, but Reese Dentner, the defense's own witness, told you that Ms. Zilius is a snake who would sell her own mother for the right price. Members of the jury, Grace Hopper and Artie Dent were good people who didn't deserve to die. They lost their lives because of the malicious choices made by Talia-Zilius. Ms. Zilius is guilty of third-degree murder. We owe it to Ms. Hopper and Mr. Dent to bring her to justice. Thank you.